Welcome to Module 2, Practical Application Across Content Areas. Before we get started, just a quick recap of our learning from Module 1. During Module 1, we discussed how children learn to read and why reading is far more than simply recognizing words on a page. We examined the simple view of reading, Scarborough's reading rope, and what neuroscience tells us about how the brain develops skilled reading. We also learned that reading is a complex process and that the brain is not naturally wired for it. Instead, reading develops through explicit, systematic instruction and meaningful opportunities to build language, knowledge, and connections over time. Now it's time to turn that understanding into action. This is the heart of the course, where research becomes practice. Throughout this module, you will learn practical classroom-ready strategies that can be woven naturally into the instruction you are already providing. We will look at ways to incorporate routines for vocabulary and morphology, extend students' language through everyday interactions, and activate and build background knowledge. Along the way, you will see examples from a variety of content areas. The goal is to recognize the literacy opportunities already present in your instruction and make them even more intentional. Let's get started. Research shows vocabulary instruction is one of the highest leverage ways educators can strengthen students' language comprehension. In Module 1, we learned that language comprehension is one of the two essential components of the simple view of reading. When students understand the words used in instruction, they are better able to understand what they hear, participate in discussions, make connections to new learning, and ultimately comprehend what they read. Vocabulary instruction isn't limited to English language arts. Every content area has its own language, concepts, and academic vocabulary. Whether you're teaching movement in PE, techniques in art, digital tools and technology, musical notation, or scientific concepts, you're introducing students to the language of your discipline. Each intentional opportunity to build vocabulary knowledge helps weave the vocabulary strand more tightly with students' background knowledge, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Over time, these interconnected strands create that rich language comprehension we talked about with Scarborough's reading rope. Many districts have instructional routines for teaching vocabulary. If your district has an established routine, continue using it to provide students with consistent experiences. If you're looking for additional guidance, Nebraska's Foundational Literacy Instructional Routines includes an evidence-based routine for vocabulary. The 4-step routine shown here is adapted directly from that resource. The routine begins by introducing the word in context. Rather than presenting a vocabulary word in isolation, embed it within a sentence, demonstration, text, image, or authentic learning experience. Context gives the word meaning and helps students connect it to what they're learning. Next, provide a student-friendly definition. Explain the meaning using language that is clear and accessible. The goal is for students to understand the concept, not memorize a dictionary definition. Then, illustrate the word with examples and non-examples. Helping students compare what the word is and what it isn't builds a deeper understanding of the concept. Whenever possible, use visuals, demonstrations, or concrete examples that fit naturally within your lesson. Finally, check students' understanding by giving them opportunities to use the word. Students might turn and talk with a partner, label an image, explain their thinking, sort examples, or apply the word during the activity you're already teaching. The more students hear, say, discuss, and use new vocabulary, the more likely they are to retain it and apply it in future learning. This vocabulary routine is meant to be simple. It doesn't require a separate vocabulary lesson or significant planning. Most of these interactions take only a minute or two and can fit naturally within the instruction you're already providing. Now let's see what this routine looks like in practice. For the next minute or two, I'd like you to imagine you're one of my students in an art classroom. Scholars, today we're going to learn a new vocabulary word, composition. Scholars, repeat that word, composition. As you look at this painting, Notice how the artist arranged the vase, the flowers, and the background to fill the page. That's called composition. Composition means how the parts of an artwork are arranged or where things are placed on the page. Tell your shoulder partner what composition means. Now let's look at two examples. The picture on the left shows a balanced composition. The objects are arranged so your eye moves naturally around the artwork. Nothing feels too crowded or too empty. Now compare it to the picture on the right. Here, almost everything is crowded into one corner of the page. This is not an example of a balanced composition because the arrangement leaves most of the page empty. Now it's your turn. Turn and talk with a partner. Look at your sketch and describe the composition. What's in the center? What's near the edges? What might you change to improve the arrangement? As you talk about your sketch, I want you to use the word composition in your response. So you might say, the composition of my sketch is balanced because the objects are spread across the page. Or, the composition of my sketch is not balanced because most of the objects are in one spot. Notice what just happened. In less than 2 minutes, we introduced a new vocabulary word, explained it, used student-friendly language, compared examples and non-examples, and immediately gave students an opportunity to use the word in a meaningful context. But vocabulary learning doesn't end there. Throughout the lesson, as I monitor student learning, I would intentionally continue using the word in my questions and feedback. So I might ask, tell me about the composition in your artwork. Or I might ask, how did you use composition to guide where you placed that object? Each time students retrieve the meaning of the word, or use it in a conversation, or apply it to their work, they're strengthening their understanding of that word. As I listen, I would provide feedback to reinforce the accurate use or clarify any misconceptions. These repeated opportunities to retrieve, use, and get feedback help move the word from working memory into long-term memory, making it much more likely that students will understand and use the vocabulary independently in the future. That doesn't mean that you'll use this routine with every unfamiliar word. Instead, think intentionally about those high leverage vocabulary in your content. Those are the words that students need to understand in order to participate, communicate, and make sense of new learning. Those are the words that are worth teaching explicitly. Now think about the planning that happens before the lesson as you identify those important words. The instruction itself is very brief, it's very intentional, and it should fit naturally into the teaching you're already doing. Over time, these small routines build students' vocabulary that ultimately strengthens their language comprehension and supports their learning across every content area. Let's see some other examples from other content areas. Thinking about this vocabulary routine, in music, you could use this routine to introduce a word like tempo by explaining that it means the speed of the music, then playing the same 4-beat pattern slowly and quickly. Students hear the difference, connect it to the word, and can immediately describe what changed. In PE, you could use this vocabulary routine for words like agility or cooperate. Those can be taught within the activity itself. You might model agility as the ability to move and change direction quickly, or ask students to identify what cooperation looked like during a team task. Students then use the word to describe what they observed. In library settings, words like genre, narrator, glossary, or table of contents can be introduced and reinforced across multiple visits. Again, that repeated exposure helps students deepen their understanding and use the words more independently over time. In technology, terms like cursor, navigate, or download can be defined with a quick visual or demonstration before students apply them during hands-on work. And in any setting, a brief turn and talk can serve as a quick check for understanding. Tell the person next to you what the word means in your own words. That's a small prompt. Give students an opportunity to process the meaning, hear the word again, and use it in context. The specific words will look different in each content area, but the routine remains the same. First, introduce the word in context. Second, explain it clearly. Third, provide an example and non-example. And fourth, give students a chance to use it. Before moving on, take a moment to think about your own setting. What is one important vocabulary word students need to understand in order to participate successfully in an upcoming lesson? Pause the video for a minute or two and jot that word down in your literacy journal or note taker. Then resume the module. As we wrap up this vocabulary routine section, this instructional routine card summarizes the same 4-step vocabulary routine we've just talked about. You might find it helpful to keep this with your lesson planning materials or other professional learning resources as a quick reference. As you plan instruction, think about the priority vocabulary that students need to understand in order to fully participate in the lesson. Those are the words most appropriate for explicit instruction or this vocabulary routine. The routine follows those same 4 steps. Introduce the word in context, provide a student-friendly definition, illustrate the word with examples and non-examples, check students' understanding by providing multiple opportunities for students to retrieve and use the word over time. Remember that retrieval strengthens learning and timely feedback helps refine understanding. When students are repeatedly hearing and saying, discussing, and applying important vocabulary words in different contexts, they're more likely to move that learning from working memory into long-term memory, where it becomes part of their everyday language. Use this routine in a way that best fits naturally within your instruction while providing students with meaningful opportunities to learn and use important vocabulary. Now let's talk about morphology. It may sound like a technical term, but in its simplest form, morphology is the study of the meaningful parts of a word. As students move through school, the words they encounter become longer, more complex, and more specific to different content areas. Rather than memorizing new words they come across, students need to learn to look for meaningful word parts that provide clues about what that word might mean. Morphological awareness begins developing in the primary grades. As students become more proficient readers, understanding word parts becomes another powerful strategy for building vocabulary, supporting spelling, and making sense of unfamiliar words that they encounter in reading. Those meaningful parts are called morphemes. Morphemes include prefixes, which come at the beginning of a word, suffixes, which come at the end, and roots or bases, which carry the word's core meaning. Remember, vocabulary was one of the language comprehension strands. Morphology gives students another way to grow that vocabulary by understanding how words are built. When students understand how words are built, they have another strategy for figuring out unknown words that matters significantly for vocabulary development and reading comprehension. Let's walk through a simple example. The prefix "re" means again or back. The base word play carries the core meaning, which is to play. And the suffix "er" means someone or something that does. Now, instead of telling students the meaning of the word replayer, we can think through it together. Scholars, if "re" means again and "play" means to play, and "er" means someone or something that does, what might a replayer be? Students don't have to know the word already. They're using the meaning of each word part to make a logical prediction. In this case, a replayer is someone or something that plays something again. Notice that we're not asking students to memorize a definition. We're teaching them a process they can use whenever they encounter an unfamiliar word. As they use this process over and over, it builds more connections and pathways in their brains. Now think about your own content area. Is there a word your students regularly encounter that has meaningful parts? Maybe it's rehearse in music, cooperate in PE, illustrator in art, or download in technology. Taking just a minute to notice those meaningful parts helps students build the habit of looking inside words for clues about their meaning. Now let's try another word that students might encounter across many different content areas, the word preview. The prefix pre means before. The base word view means to see or look at. So a preview is something you look at before the main event. Students might preview a book in the library, preview directions before beginning a project, preview a new game in PE, or preview a piece of music before performing it. These brief conversations don't take long. Simply pausing to notice meaningful word parts helps students develop that habit of looking inside those words for clues, giving them another strategy for understanding the increasingly complex vocabulary they encounter across content areas. Now it's your turn to put these routines into practice. Think about an upcoming unit that you will be teaching. As you've seen throughout this module, vocabulary doesn't need to be an extra. Instead, it's an intentional way to help students access the content you are already teaching. Begin by identifying the priority vocabulary students will need to understand in order to fully participate in the lesson. Remember, not every unfamiliar word needs direct instruction. Focus on the words that are essential for students to understand the concepts, directions, or skills you will be teaching. For each priority vocabulary word, write a student-friendly definition. Then think about one example and one non-example that will help students better understand what the word means. Sometimes knowing what a word is not is just as helpful as knowing what it is. Next, take a closer look at each word. Does it contain a meaningful prefix, suffix, or root? If so, consider whether taking 30 seconds to highlight that word part could help students better understand the word or recognize it again in the future. Remember, the goal isn't to teach a full morphology lesson, it's simply to help students notice how meaningful word parts can provide clues to a word's meaning. Then think about beyond the introduction of the word. Vocabulary learning happens through repeated opportunities to retrieve and use the language over time. As you plan for your lesson, identify where students will have opportunities to hear, say, explain, discuss, or apply each vocabulary word. These opportunities do not need to be elaborate. They might be a partner discussion, a teacher question, a written reflection, or a quick explanation during practice. Each opportunity to retrieve and use the word helps deepen understanding and makes it more likely students will remember and use that word independently. Finally, you're going to use the vocabulary instruction routine template that's linked on the slide to plan your instruction. Complete one template for each priority vocabulary word that you've identified for your unit. For example, if you've selected 5 priority vocabulary words, you will complete 5 templates. As you work, think about how these routines fit naturally into your existing instruction. This reflection and planning is designed to make the vocabulary instruction you are already providing more intentional. And if intentional vocabulary instruction is new to you, this routine offers a simple, research-informed place to start. So thoughtfully selecting, introducing, and revisiting important vocabulary words allows students the language they need to access, discuss, and apply the learning in your classroom environment. Go ahead and pause the module now. This activity should take about 20 minutes to complete. When you're finished, return to begin Module 3. Welcome back. As you implement these routines, there will be moments when students get stuck. They may hesitate on an unfamiliar word, misunderstand a direction, or struggle to express what they're thinking. Often, a brief instructional response is enough to help students move forward while continuing to build their language and literacy skills. There are 3 strategies on the slide that are simple instructional moves you can use throughout the day. They do not require any special materials, additional planning, or even extensive training. Instead, they're just small adjustments in how you respond that keep students engaged in learning while also reinforcing important literacy skills. The first move is to break words into parts. If a student pauses on a long or unfamiliar word, resist the urge to simply tell them the word. Instead, help them look for something they already know. You might ask, "Do you notice a part of that word you recognize?" Or, "Let's break that word into smaller parts." This encourages students to draw on what they know about sounds and meaningful word parts to figure out unfamiliar words, building both independence and confidence. The second move is to clarify vocabulary quickly. Sometimes students are not confused by the activity, they simply are unfamiliar with a word. If you say "rotate to the next station" and a student hesitates, a quick, brief explanation may be all that they need. Rotate means to move to the next station. A quick, student-friendly explanation keeps the lesson moving while also ensuring vocabulary doesn't become a barrier to the learning. The third move is to model and extend language. When students share an idea, build on what they say by introducing more precise academic language. If a student says, "The music got faster," you might respond, "Yes, the tempo increased, it accelerated." If a student in PE says, "I threw the ball harder," you might say, "Yes, you increased the force of your throw." In art, a student might say, "Wow, the colors look different." You might respond, "Yeah, you created contrast." The goal isn't to correct students, it's to expand their language while affirming the ideas they are already communicating. These instructional moves take only a few seconds, but over time they help students continue to develop vocabulary, build their confidence, and stay engaged in learning. These are also examples of responsive teaching that support students whenever language becomes an obstacle to understanding or participation. Throughout this module, we've talked about vocabulary and language comprehension. Another essential piece of language comprehension is background knowledge. Reading comprehension isn't just about recognizing words, it's about connecting those words to ideas, experiences, and concepts that already exist in a student's mind. Think back to Scarborough's reading rope. One of the language comprehension strands is background knowledge. The more students know about the world, the easier it becomes to understand what they read, participate in discussions, and make connections across subjects. This is one of the greatest strengths of your instructional environment. Every lesson in art, music, PE, technology, or the library gives students experiences, concepts, and vocabulary that become part of the knowledge they bring to future reading and learning. Keep that in mind as you move into the next slide, where we will look at specific ways to activate, build, and connect background knowledge in your own lessons. One of the most valuable ways specialists contribute to literacy is by helping students build that background knowledge. Comprehension depends on much more than recognizing the words on a page. Students also need knowledge about the topic they're reading. When they can connect new learning and new information to what they already know, they're able to understand more deeply and remember it longer. Imagine reading an article about a baseball game if you have never seen a baseball game before. Even if you can read every word accurately, terms like double play, bunt, or infield don't carry much meaning because there isn't any background knowledge to connect them to. Research has consistently shown that background knowledge is one of the strongest contributors to reading comprehension. In fact, as students move through the grades and texts become more complex, what they already know increasingly influences how well they understand what they read. The exciting part is that you help build that knowledge every day. Whether students are learning about rhythm, perspective, balance, digital citizenship, or genres, they're developing knowledge they carry into future reading and learning and other classroom environments. There are 3 simple ways you can intentionally support that work. First, activate what students already know before introducing something new. Ask questions that help them connect today's learning to prior experiences, previous lessons, or something they've encountered elsewhere. Those connections prepare the brain to attach new learning to existing knowledge. Second, build background knowledge by intentionally providing new experiences. This could be a photograph, a short demonstration, a brief video clip, a read aloud, or some other hands-on activity. These experiences become reference points students can draw on later when they encounter the topic in reading or another discussion. Finally, connect what students are learning across their school day. Make those connections explicit. You could say, you've been studying habitats in science. Today we're going to create artwork inspired by different ecosystems. Or, your classroom has been learning about fractions. Today in music, we'll see how note values represent fractional parts of a measure. Naming those connections helps students see that knowledge doesn't exist in isolated subjects. It builds across experiences. Every lesson you teach has the potential to expand students' background knowledge. Those experiences become part of the knowledge students bring every time they read, write, speak, and learn. Many students don't struggle with comprehension because they can't read the words. They struggle because they haven't yet had the experiences that make those words meaningful, and you help provide those experiences. One of the biggest ideas from the science of reading is that comprehension does not begin when students read a text. It begins long before that. Students make sense of new learning by connecting it to what they already know and have experienced. As specialists, you are in a unique position to build background knowledge because your classrooms are often filled with hands-on experiences, movement, visuals, demonstration, music, discussion, and authentic practice. Those experiences become the foundation students use to understand new ideas across all of their learning. Take a moment to think about an upcoming lesson you will be teaching. Before introducing new content, what could you intentionally connect students to first? Maybe it's a familiar routine, an image, a demonstration, a movement pattern, a piece of music, a previous project, a conversation, or a shared experience. Remember, you're intentionally activating what students already know so they have something to attach the new learning to. As you plan, think about these questions. What do my students already know that I can build from? What experience can I provide before introducing this new concept? How can I make the learning meaningful before asking students to practice or apply it? Now look at the second question. One of the strengths of a school-wide literacy system is that students learn best when ideas connect across classrooms. You do not have to teach the same content as the classroom teacher to reinforce the learning. For example, an art teacher might reinforce vocabulary students are learning in science through illustration. A PE teacher might use sequencing and directional language that students are practicing during literacy instruction. A music teacher might reinforce patterns, rhythm, and academic vocabulary connected to classroom learning. So think about one opportunity to collaborate with a classroom teacher. Is there a vocabulary word, concept, unit, or theme you could intentionally reinforce in your classroom space? Even one small connection helps students build stronger knowledge networks. Take the next 15 to 20 minutes to sketch out one lesson. Identify the background knowledge you will activate before introducing the new content. And then consider one way collaboration could strengthen that connection. You will complete this in your literacy journal, or the prompts are provided on the note taker for this course. We will see you back in 20 minutes. Welcome back. We are now moving to component 2.5, where we will take a closer look at how the 4 strategies, vocabulary, morphology, in the moment, and background knowledge from this module work together in a real lesson rather than as 4 separate tools or routines. Here's an art class example. A teacher introducing value, how light or dark a color is, might show a shaded sphere next to a flat circle as the example and non-example. That's a vocabulary move. In the same short lesson, the teacher might break down monochromatic into its parts, mono, meaning one, chrome, meaning color, and atic as the ending. One color, many values. That's morphology, taught in under a minute. When a student says, "It looks weird," the teacher extends the language in the moment. You're using contrast to show depth. And before any of this starts, the teacher connects back to last week's color wheel lesson on warm and cool colors. That's background knowledge activated right at the start. Notice what happened. All 4 strategies in about 5 minutes inside a lesson a teacher was already planning to teach. No separate literacy block, no significant prep. As you look at the next slide, start thinking about what this layering could look like in your own content area. This slide walked through an art example. This one shows the same 4 moves in a completely different setting. Here is a PE lesson built around a dribbling drill. The teacher introduces possession right in the middle of the drill, having control of the ball. That's the vocabulary move. In the same short window, the teacher can break down possession in 2 parts. Possess meaning to hold or control, and ION meaning the act or state of, literally the state of holding. And that's morphology, taught in seconds mid-drill. When a student grabs the ball and says, "I got it," the teacher extends the language in the moment. You gained possession of the ball. And this all connects back to something already familiar, the week prior's lesson on offense and defense, where whoever has possession is on offense. Same 4 strategies as the art example, same 5 minutes, just a different classroom. As you think about your own content area, this is the kind of layering to aim for. Not a separate vocabulary lesson, just a few deliberate moves inside a lesson you were already teaching. Now that you've seen 2 worked examples, one from an art classroom and one from a PE classroom, let's expand that idea across other instructional settings. These examples show how small, intentional literacy moves can be woven into instruction that's already happened. The goal isn't to teach reading during art, music, PE, library, or technology. The goal is to intentionally support the language and knowledge students need to be successful across all learning environments. Take a few minutes to read through each of the 6 examples. You might begin with your own content area, then compare it to 1 or 2 others. As you read, look for the common pattern. Each example combines a strategy that introduces or deepens language, like vocabulary or morphology, with a strategy that reinforces learning through an in-the-moment instructional move or by connecting to students' background knowledge. Those intentional pairings help students hear, use, and make meaning of new language within authentic learning environments. Notice that none of these examples require a new lesson, additional instructional time, or extensive preparation. They're simply thoughtful adjustments to instructional moments that are already part of your teaching. As you finish reading, reflect on these questions. Which example feels most similar to something you're already doing in your classroom? Which pairing gives you one idea you could easily incorporate into an upcoming lesson? As you've seen throughout this module, supporting literacy isn't about every educator becoming a reading teacher. It's about every educator intentionally creating opportunities for students to build vocabulary, connect ideas, strengthen language, and deepen understanding within their own content area. In the next activity, you will use these examples as inspiration to design one intentional literacy pairing for an upcoming lesson in your own classroom. So far, you've planned either a vocabulary routine or a background knowledge connection. Those are both powerful on their own, but effective instruction is rarely built around a single strategy. The strongest lessons intentionally layer multiple supports so students have several opportunities to hear, process, use, and connect new language. So why does this matter? Because literacy isn't developed through a single exposure to a new word or concept. Remember what research tells us. Students build vocabulary, strengthen language comprehension, and deepen understanding when they encounter new language multiple times in meaningful contexts and have opportunities to actively use it. Every intentional interaction with language helps strengthen the language comprehension side of the simple view of reading. Think back to the lesson you just planned. Keep your vocabulary routine or your background knowledge connection, and now ask yourself, what's one additional literacy support I could naturally add? Maybe it's giving students a chance to turn and talk before sharing, asking them to explain their thinking using the new vocabulary, connecting to a visual demonstration or previous experience, revisiting a previously learned concept or word, or ending with a brief reflection or summary. Each of these creates another opportunity for students to hear, speak, think about, and make meaning of language within your content area. Then think about where each support best fits. Every lesson has natural points where students are preparing to learn, make sense of new ideas, or reflect on what they've learned. So you're going to ask yourself, what belongs at the beginning to activate background knowledge and prepare students for new learning? What should happen during instruction to help students make sense of new vocabulary or concepts? What could students do at the end to reinforce their understanding and communicate what they've learned? Finally, think like an observer of student learning. Rather than asking, did I teach it? Ask, how will I know students experienced it? What will you actually see or hear? Maybe students will be using the new vocabulary accurately during discussion, making connections to previous learning, explaining their thinking with greater precision, using discipline-specific language more competently, or independently applying a concept using the language you've just intentionally modeled. Those are observable signs that students are not only participating in the lesson, they're building the language and knowledge that support comprehension across learning environments. Take the next 20 minutes to build your layered strategy. Keep it realistic, one lesson, one intentional plan, and one or two additional literacy supports that naturally fit your instructional environment. Small intentional literacy moves like these help students strengthen their vocabulary, language, and background knowledge that all make learning and ultimately reading comprehension more successful. As we wrap up Module 2, let's bring these 4 instructional routines together into one practical toolkit. These strategies are not necessarily intended to be used all at once or in every lesson. Instead, think of them as instructional tools you can intentionally select based on what students need during their learning. When you're introducing a new content-specific term, use the vocabulary routine, provide the word in context, offer a student-friendly definition, share examples and non-examples, and give students an opportunity to use the word. This helps students develop the vocabulary needed to understand and communicate new ideas. When students encounter an unfamiliar or complex word, you could consider morphology, breaking a word into meaningful parts, its prefix, root, and suffix. This helps students unlock the meaning of an academic vocabulary they'll encounter across content areas. During instruction, use the in-the-moment supports whenever students hesitate, misunderstand a word, or need clarification. A quick explanation, modeling the language, or extending a student's response can strengthen both understanding and the language students use to express their thinking. Finally, before introducing something new, activate background knowledge. Helping students connect new learning to prior experiences, previous lessons, or learning in another classroom gives them a stronger foundation for understanding new concepts. As you move into the final part of this module, keep this toolkit nearby. You don't need to use every strategy in every lesson. Rather, recognize when one of these routines can naturally strengthen the instruction you're already providing. As we wrap up Module 2, I'd like you to pause and think about what feels both meaningful and manageable. Throughout Module 2, you've explored how intentional vocabulary instruction, building background knowledge, and layering literacy supports can strengthen learning in any classroom. Not by changing what you teach, but by making the learning experiences you already provide even more purposeful. The goal isn't to leave with 10 new strategies. The goal is to leave with one strategy you're confident enough to try. Take a few minutes to reflect on these 3 questions. What strategy will you try first? Maybe it's the vocabulary routine you planned. Maybe it's intentionally activating background knowledge before introducing a new skill or concept. Or maybe it's the layered strategy you designed by combining multiple supports. When will you try this strategy? Think about a real lesson coming up in the next week or two or in the future. The more specific you are, the more likely you will be able to put your plan into action. Finally, what evidence will tell you it helped students? Rather than thinking about formal assessment data, think about what you will be able to observe during instruction. Will students use new vocabulary more accurately? Will they make stronger connections to previous learning? Will they explain their thinking with greater confidence? Will more students participate in discussion or apply the new concept independently? Those observable behaviors are valuable evidence that your instructional decisions are supporting student learning. Remember, the science of reading isn't a collection of isolated strategies. It's a way of thinking about instruction. Every opportunity you provide for students to build knowledge, develop language, communicate their thinking, and connect new learning strengthens the foundation for literacy. In our final module, we'll shift from planning these practices to thinking about how to sustain them as part of everyday instruction. So take a few minutes to write your responses to the question on your screen. Keep your responses practical and realistic. The goal is to leave Module 2 with one intentional next step that you can implement in your own instructional setting. When you are done, you are ready for our final module, Module 3.